Hello everyone, welcome to this course on Boto3. In this course, we are going to learn everything about Boto3 and see how it can be used to automate your AWS tasks using Python. We're also going to see how to install and set up Boto3 in your local machine and run your Boto3 from local machine. Okay, and we're also going to do some hands-on examples and write some code using Boto3 to interact with AWS services. Okay, so let's get started. Firstly, what is covered in this course? In the first section, we'll introduce you to Boto3 and the concept of Boto3 and what SDK means. And in the next section, we are going to set up Boto3 in our local machine and uh, you know get everything ready to run our Boto3 code from our local machine. Okay, after the setup is done, we are going to do some hands-on coding examples using Boto3 and write some real world code to interact with AWS services using Boto3. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so firstly, what is Boto3? Boto3 is an AWS SDK for Python. Okay, so before we go further, we need to understand what an SDK means. So I'll quickly explain you what SDK means and then we'll come back to this slide later to understand what Boto3 is exactly. Okay, so let's see what an SDK is. SDK is short for Software Development Kit. So what it means is it's a bundled package of tools, libraries, documentation, and code samples that is designed to help developers build software applications efficiently and effectively for a specific environment or platform. In this case, the platform is AWS. So AWS is going to provide us, a package of tools, libraries, documentation, and code samples, everything in one place, so that we can make use of it and develop applications in AWS using Python. Okay, so that is a like high level definition of what SDK means. So what all does SDK include? It includes APIs to interact with services. So you can make API calls to the services or the platform, in this case AWS. So it also gives you the development tools and the documentation, how to use these libraries and modules, etc. And it also gives you some sample code examples on you know the usage of this code to interact with this platform. Okay, so SDKs streamline the development process by providing necessary components and guidance. So this enables developers to focus on creating functional and innovative applications. So SDKs are basically the platform, in this case the AWS, enabling the developers to build applications on their platform in a streamlined and effective fashion. So AWS has designed this Boto3 module for us, which is an SDK for Python, using which we can develop applications on AWS. So I hope that a simple explanation of SDK was useful. So now let's go back to see what Boto3 is. So like we discussed, Boto3 is an AWS SDK for Python. So that's how this is. Boto3 is an SDK that AWS gives us to interact with AWS and build applications on AWS using Python programming language. Okay, so they also have different SDK for Java as well, which is called AWS SDK for Java. So but Boto3 is the SDK for Python. Okay, so it allows Python developers to interact with AWS services programmatically, simplifying the process of managing and automating AWS resources. So there are a lot of ways in which you can interact with AWS services, right? You can interact with AWS services using management console, so you can log into your account and directly create buckets, create instances, or delete buckets, etc., directly using console. Or you can do it through command line interface, or also you can do it programmatically using Boto3. So basically a user or application so can interact with AWS services using Boto3, which is a Python package. So that is this flow. So a user or an application, it need not be a person who is interacting with AWS services, right? Even your applications will be interacting with AWS services. So and a person or a application can interact with AWS services using Python, and to do that we need the Boto3 module. So I hope you understood like what Boto3 is and where it sits in this scheme of things. So using Boto3, you can interact with any AWS services with simple Python code. You can write a Python code to create buckets or delete buckets, create instances, or automate a lot of AWS tasks which you would otherwise do manually. Okay, so and also Boto3, AWS gives us with a extensive documentation for Boto3, which you can leverage to write your code as well. Okay, so with that understanding of Boto3, let's actually see how to start using Boto3. Okay, so to start using Boto3, we need to basically firstly install and set up the Boto3 in our local machine. So I'm going to show in this video how to set up Boto3 in Windows, but overall the process is going to be pretty much same for even if you are on a Mac or even Linux. Okay, so these are the steps that are involved. So firstly, you would need Python, which is which is where this Boto3 runs on, and you would need AWS CLI. We are going to see why that is needed, and then after that you will need you will need to install Boto3, which is a Python package using pip command, and then we will create an IAM user in AWS and configure that user in our local. So this is the user which the code will use to interact with AWS services. Okay, so we'll follow these steps and then quickly set up Boto3 in our machine, Windows machine, and then start writing our Boto3 code. So I already have Python installed in my machine, so I'm not going to perform that step again. So I'm going to directly jump to the next step, which is downloading AWS CLI. So to do that, you can just search for AWS CLI install. You can click on this link that comes up over here. Okay, based on your OS, you can just select this one. So I'm on Windows, so I'm going to select Windows. Okay, so I'm just going to download this installer and let that download complete. Okay, so it is downloaded, so I'll just click on that and click on next, accept, next, next, and install. Okay, so it'll take, I think, a couple of minutes to install AWS CLI, so we'll wait for that to be completed.
Okay, so it's installed. I'm just going to click on finish. Okay, so now we have installed AWS CLI on our machine. So the next step is to install Boto3. So let's do that. So I'm just going to open command prompt in my laptop and run the command pip install Boto3. So if your default pip is pip3, you can run pip3 install Boto3 as well. So yep, this is basically a simple Python. So this is how you would install any Python package, right? You just run pip install and the package name. So Boto3 is just another Python package. So let's run that pip install and it's downloading Boto3. So let's wait for that to be finished. It's installing the packages and it's done. Okay, so we have installed Boto3 as well. So to check whether Boto3 is installed properly or not, you can do a simple check, like you can just open Python the same Python shell and try to run import Boto3, and if it works properly, it means that Boto3 is installed properly in your machine. Okay, so if this command doesn't run, then it means that there is something wrong with your installation. So make sure it is properly installed. Okay, so once Boto3 is installed, we need to configure an IAM user in AWS. So this user is basically what we will then configure in our local machine as well. So that will be used by Boto3 to interact with AWS services. Okay, so let's go to IAM here. Click on IAM and click on users. Click on create user and let's call this user something like Boto3 user. So I'm not going to give this user access to management console, because I want this user to be able to access my AWS only using program, okay, or programmatically access it. So I'm not going to select this box. Click on next. You can add a user to a group if it exists, or you can directly attach the policies. So I'm going to give this user an administrator access. So this will give this user permission to interact with all AWS services. So you can restrict this access, of course, by selecting only the particular access that you might need. Okay, so basically this administrator access will give permissions on all AWS services to this user. Okay, click on next and click on create user. Okay, so let's open this user that we created. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to configure the credentials of this user in our local machine. So what we'll do is that we'll store the credentials of this user in our local machine. So whenever we run Boto3 code in our local machine, what happens is the Boto3, like it basically does an authentication through the credentials in our local and then establishes a connection with AWS account and interacts with AWS. So these credentials need to be stored in our local. So let me click on security credentials, and here if you see, you can see this create access key. Okay, and I'm going to select command line interface for this one, and I understand. Click on next. We'll give some create access key. So we have created this access key and secret access key. You can download this CSV file and store it securely. So these are the credentials for this user. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to configure these credentials in my local. So I'm going to go to command prompt in my local and I'm going to do exit, and I'm going to run this command AWS configure. Okay, so before I run before you run this command, you should make sure that AWS CLI is installed in your machine properly. If it is not installed, you will not be able to run. So to check whether CLI is installed properly or not, you can run AWS and it will give you this AWS help and all those things. Okay, so let's run this command AWS configure. Okay, it is asking us for access key ID. So this is the access key. I'm going to copy this and paste it here, enter. And next thing it is asking is secret access key. I'm going to copy the secret access key and paste it here. So I'm going to of course delete this later, so make sure you don't share this with anyone. Okay, and so it's also asking us a default region name, so you can set a default region here. So whenever you make any calls to AWS services, by default those will be executed in this region. Okay, so I have given it as US East 1, so let it be default output format, and that's fine. Okay, so now we have configured this IAM user in our local machine. So now whenever we run code in our local machine, it authenticates with our AWS account using these credentials, and whatever the permissions that this user has, only those commands will be allowed to be executed. Okay, so we will see that when we write the code. Okay, so now when the next step is done, we have configured this IAM user in our local. So next we can start writing a Boto3 code and start interacting with AWS services. Okay, so to write the code, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. So you can use any IDE or editor of your choice. So I'm going to click on new file and call it as Boto3 tutorial.py. Okay. Okay, so let's start writing our Boto3 code now. So before we start, I want to show you the Boto3 documentation of AWS. So you can always refer to this documentation whenever you are writing Boto3 code to see what are the methods available and what is the syntax and what is the arguments that you need to pass to any particular method and things like that. Okay, so you can Google for Boto3 documentation and click on this. So this has a very detailed documentation on this Boto3 module. Okay, so actually for this tutorial purposes, let's write some code on S3 service. So you can write any interact with any AWS service, of course, but for this tutorial let's write some code on AWS S3 service using Boto3. Okay, here under API references you can click on this S3, and this document shows like what are the all the methods that are available on S3 in Boto3. Okay, so firstly, to start using Boto3, you need to import the Boto3 and then create a client for a particular service using boto3.client with that service name. So what this does is it gives you an interface to call all the methods that are available on this services. So when you basically create an S3 client like this, then you can call all these methods on this client. Okay, so we'll see how to do that. Let's go here, let's import Boto3, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do S3 client is equal to Boto3 dot client, sorry, and S3. Okay, so this is how you can initialize a client. So once you have initialized this client, you can call all these methods on Boto3, like client dot copy object, client dot create bucket, and all those things. Okay. So in the first step, let's try to create an S3 bucket using S3 client. Okay, I'm going to show you my S3 console. Let's see what are the buckets that are there here. Okay, so I have these buckets in my, so let's create a bucket called Boto3 tutorial bucket or whatever. Okay, so to do that, we'll refer to the syntax in the documentation itself. So let's go to documentation and see. So here we have create bucket method, and if you see here, it gives you like, what are the arguments that you need to pass. So this is how you call that S3 client dot create bucket. Okay, and these are all the variables that you can pass. So not all the like parameters are compulsory, so many of them are optional. So you have things like ACL, bucket name, and bucket configuration, the location, bucket name, and all those things, and rights. So you have host object ownership and all those things. So not all these are compulsory. So we'll pass only this bucket name and create the bucket for now. Okay, so let's create it like response is equal to history client dot create bucket is equal to, and we'll specify the name of the bucket, bucket 1. Okay, so let's run this code and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to run it using Python Boto3 tutorial.py. Okay, so it actually ran the code. I should have actually printed the response to see what is the response that we got back, but anyway, it's fine. So we'll do that next time. So let's go to our AWS and see if that bucket is created. Let me refresh this and see if the bucket is created. No, it's not. So let's go back and see what is the response that we got. Okay, now we are getting a status code 200, which means that it should be successful. Let's go here and refresh it. Okay, yeah, I see the bucket here, Boto3 tutorial bucket 1. So we have created bucket using Python Boto3. Okay, so you can like write any of the, so to see the buckets which are present here in your bucket AWS account, you can use list buckets. And let's run this code now. Let's print the response, of course. Okay, so if you see here, we got the bucket. So basically this is a JSON response, so you can like get only the particular key of that JSON, so that so yeah, if you see here, now we got the list of buckets. So Airflow env1, and then glue assets bucket, Lambda destination bucket, and all this. So these are the list of buckets that are there on my in my AWS account. Okay, so you can work like this, like you can delete the bucket, or you can upload the files using Boto3. So you can go here and see what are the different methods that are available to interact with AWS services using Boto3. So you can put object, delete object, and all those things. So we are not going to do all of this, so you can refer to the method like that you want depending on your use case, and use that method to do your task. Okay, so this is a S3 client, and you can similarly create let's say a Lambda client, right? Let's call Lambda client, and this will be Lambda. And now this Lambda client will give us all the methods that are available on Lambda service. So let's go to Boto3 documentation and look for Lambda. So if you go to Lambda, you have Lambda client, and these are the functions that are there. So we can use this client to get, perform actions on Lambda service. So let's see, let's run this list functions method to see the list of Lambda functions that are there in my AWS account. Okay, I'm going to say list functions, and this I'm going to call Lambda client. I'm going to remove this buckets and just print the response. I'm just going to clear this out and run this code. Okay, so I don't have any functions in my AWS account, so that is why I got this empty. So yeah, that's how you can use client of different AWS service. So yeah, you can refer to this AWS document to just get an idea of how to use whatever service that you want depending on your use case, and start writing your code like this. Okay, so I hope I was able to give you a simple introduction to Boto3 and how to install and set up Boto3 in your local, and start writing your Boto3 code. Okay, so if you want me to dig deep into any particular service and how to do stuff on that particular service using Boto3, do let me know in the comments, and I'll be doing an extensive video on that. Okay, so that's it for this video, and I hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.